part of your community. This is Rogers TV. The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers or Rogers TV.
The Toronto City budget quandary. What would you cut? What would you save? Let's talk about it on Goldhawk Live. Almost 350 citizens of Toronto signed up to speak to city councillors about budget cuts yesterday and today. The hearings are set to close in about a half an hour. All deputants will not have had a chance to speak by then. So for the next hour, we're going to extend a bit. We'll give you a chance to speak right here. And our question for you, what can ordinary citizens do to preserve services at City Hall? Give us a call right now at 416-446-7090. And my guest here in studio, Mark Richardson, is here. Mark is a deputant who spoke against the cuts and for saving Fairmount Community Centre. Carol Downey is here. She also spoke. She's a former resident of a women's shelter. David Smith is here. He spoke of opposing cuts. He lives at Birchmount Residence, a home for seniors with disabilities. Shelley Carroll joins us as well. A Toronto City Councillor for Ward 33, Don Valley East, and a former budget chief. Thank you all for coming in. Mark, let me come to you first. What essentially was your message today when you spoke to council?
Well, Fairmount Community Centre in Ward 32 is a really important part of my neighbourhood, and I want to maintain it. Currently, the budget plan is to cancel a lot of the programming there. If the programming gets cancelled, we figure that's the first step towards shutting down the facility entirely.
Yeah.
I don't pay enough for the programs that I take and my kids take at that centre. I'm able to pay more. I should be paying closer to the Ontario average for community recreation programs. And the city right now is undercharging people who have the means to pay.
No, do you mean undercharging through their taxes or undercharging through user pay?
Through user fees.
Through user fees. You would pay more for user fees.
Right now, my son does a program that's ball hockey in after school.
Yeah.
It costs $1.66 an hour to me for him to be in that program. The average across Ontario for a similar program is about $8.
About $8. So you'd certainly pay more.
I'd pay the $8, and there are plenty of people in my neighborhood who would pay that. And I want to save the subsidies for the people who really need them to access those programs. And
if those programs aren't there, your fear is this is thin edge of the wedge. Eventually, there'll be an excuse to shut it down because nothing's going on there.
Well,
is that the idea?
That's the problem, right? We lose money. The city loses money on every recreation program, so we're not going to make it up in volume. We've got to get to a place where these programs are cost centers where we can generate income through these programs. Where I'm a mixed-use neighborhood. So I've got people who can afford to pay and people who can't afford to pay. So let's let the people who can afford to pay what everybody else in Ontario pays.
Well, then what about the people who can't afford to pay? What happens to them?
Then use the subsidies that I would normally get to subsidize them.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
I don't mind somebody in the same class as my son still paying the $1.66, but those of us who can pay should be able to pay the $8.
Don't you get into a whole problem of distinguishing then who can pay the so-called market rate and then who pays the $1.66?
But we already do that with rent subsidies. The government already does that with HST rebates.
So it shouldn't be tough.
It shouldn't be tough to do.
Now, Carol Downey, you were there today too. What was your essential message to all the politicians?
That the shelters are just about the worst way to house a person. They're the least efficient, they're ridiculously expensive, and they perpetuate a problem that breaks people. If they used the same money and put people in proper homes, apartments and whatever, proper places to live where they have their own front door, they could save a whack of money, taxpayers would be getting much better bang for their buck, and it would solve a terrible, terrible problem.
But don't the women's shelters serve an immediate need in emergency situations where a shelter is required?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
But that's a small number of people compared to the number of people who use shelters, the number of people who need them for genuine emergencies. My house just burnt down.
Yeah.
My husband kicked me out.
Exactly.
Whatever. That's a small percentage of the people who use shelters.
Okay, so the shelters are being used by other people who would be more properly housed in something because they're more of a long-term prospect in terms of them living there.
Many people who live in shelters are there for long-term, are there for years, are there over and over again. They get housed for a few months, and then the wheels fall off and they're back in the shelter, and so on and so forth. It's crazy.
So your message is really about misdirected money, isn't it?
Misdirected money. There's very big emphasis these days on taxpayers wanting their money to go further and wanting to see their money well spent. Well, lobby the government, lobby the province to change the laws so that shelters are not the first recourse. Have people properly housed, because the shelter system breaks people's spirit. Absolutely it does. I was in a shelter myself for 3 months, and it breaks you. And you cannot, when you're wondering where you're going to sleep, where you're wondering whether or not you're safe, where you have no privacy, you cannot concentrate on anything else. So if you, and that breaks you, so you can't do anything else with your life. If you want to see poor people get a job and get their lives together and so on, which many people who don't have that experience think is a simple thing, get them a proper place to live. Let them be able to do something besides wondering what they're going to do in 24 hours.
Don't leave them in a shelter. Yeah. David Smith, what did you say to the politicians today?
Well, I basically said to them, I said, this is a shelter for men that have both physical and mental handicaps.
We're talking about Birchmount residents now.
Birchmount residents.
Yeah, okay.
Keep in mind, we are unique, and I've done my research on it. We are the only kind of a shelter, a senior shelter of its kind, anywhere in North America. This is one of the best kept secrets.
There are no other shelters for senior men?
Not that I'm aware of anywhere in Canada or the United States. We have gentlemen there that both mentally and physically handicapped. We have gentlemen that have no legs. We have gentlemen that have one leg. We have gentlemen that cannot even think for themselves, wash themselves. Some of them basically can't feed themselves. They get fears of going outside the door. So this here shelter, with the staff and the medical people, is a great, great haven.
How many people are there? How many people are in this Birchmount residence?
It will house 60.
60, yeah.
At the moment, we have 53 gentlemen.
Okay.
We have been told that the shelter is closed to intake. There will be no other people coming
grandfathered, as it were, right? No more people in.
No more people in, for the simple reason until this budget situation is over. So if some poor gentleman is on the street at Christmas time and he requires the services, this service is no longer available to him in our shelter.
So, okay, nobody in until the budget. But I mean, does this budget speak specifically of the Birchmount residents, saying the ultimate goal here is to close it or to cut back on its funding? That's what's really going to happen, right?
Well, what I've been told, what I get from the budget gentleman, is that basically it looks like it's coming down to a vote. We're going to close.
Well, of course, all of these things are coming down to a vote, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he is telling us that, oh, we'll find you suitable housing, we'll look after you, we'll do this and this. Well, my thing is, come to my house, look at the gentleman, look at the problems they got, and what we couldn't solve in 10 years, I'd like to know how they're going to solve it in 18 months.
Is that how long the Birchmount residence has been there? For 10 years?
Almost 12, actually.
12 years.
Yeah, almost 12 years. And we've had one gentleman there who's been there 10 years. He is physically handicapped. He's on crutches. He has one leg. I don't know what you're going to do with these people.
And the worry would be, where the heck are these men going to go if push comes to shove and they close the residence,
the scary thought about it is they become extremely vulnerable. They are of age of anywhere from 60 to 90. They're vulnerable to crime, drugs, alcohol,
All kinds of things. Let me stop you there. We're going to take a break, get some phoners involved in our conversation, and talk to Shelley Carroll.